There we go. So I want to welcome everybody. I call this webinar training and informational event from staff to supervisor making the transition. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background here in a minute, but I want to give you guys an idea of what we're going to cover while we're here. I want to talk about why we're here, what's our goal for today. I want to give you an introduction to me, a little bit about my background and how we arrived at this program that we're piloting. I want to give you some training today, give you some additional insights, hopefully in a way that you maybe haven't thought about things before with these 3 strategies for making the transition. I want to give you an overview of the training program that we're piloting, give you an opportunity to ask questions, and then talk about some important upcoming dates. So why we're here, we're piloting a first-line supervisor credentialing program for the Susquehanna region. Some important things in this, first of all, is the word credentialing. This training will result in a nationally recognized credential that will follow the trainee wherever they go. Originally, I had wanted to do 1 pilot for both counties, but Debbie convinced me that doing 1 for Cecil and 1 for Hartford would probably be better because people are less likely to travel, across the bridge there. And if we could do a pilot for each, that's what we want to do. We need about 8 to 15 students for each pilot, and scholarships are available for participating businesses. Also, again, I want to emphasize that I wanted to make this webinar valuable to you other than in just talking about the program by giving you some training, some complimentary training in a way that sort of helps you develop insights about what it takes to make the transition. So who am I? What you're seeing here is an article that ran in I-95 Business back in 2015. My specialty is helping companies hire and develop a world-class workforce. That's what organizational development is all about. I help train individuals in things like communication skills, team performance, emotional intelligence, time management, all sorts of different things to help individuals perform at their highest level and teams perform at their highest level. And I'm known as the workforce doctor because I use a medical-like diagnostic approach to organizational development. I like to find what's the problem in your organization and then determine what's the best approach. And I use diagnostic tools to help diagnose problems. And for the past 5 years, I've done extensive work supporting the Susquehanna region workforce system. When I talk about the Susquehanna region, I mean Hartford and Cecil County. As I mentioned before, I've been working with Alan Sexton very closely for most of those past 5 years. And with the in the workforce system, we have what's called the Susquehanna Workforce Innovation Partnership. Through this, we try to get all of the organizations that are involved with helping job seekers get to work and bring them together as a partner and help create links between the organizations so that we can be more effective. And for this, I've done a whole lot of projects over the years. I do workforce training for the group every year. So I've taught communication skills, emotional intelligence, strategic thinking skills, customer service skills, and a number of other things to the partnership members. I've also developed career pathways, and the career pathways are the things that led me to this training that we're talking about today. What's a career pathway? This is a career pathway. This is something that a job seeker who's coming into one of the partners organizations can actually go in and say, I would like to explore what are my opportunities in a certain industry. And we have career pathways for the 5 most in-demand industry sectors in the region. Manufacturing is one of them. And so from this, an individual can go in and say, well, if I enter the workforce as a forklift operator, I can then move through this pathway. I can become a machine operator. I can go from that to being a CNC operator, or I can move into being a programmer or a tool and die maker. And this has been really helpful for individuals who are looking to see what opportunities they have, because with each one of these pathways, you also get to look at what does it take to achieve that job, what sort of credentials, what sort of certifications, what sort of degrees or whatever, and then where you can get them. So one of the things that I've noticed in each one of these pathways, there is a substantial demand for supervisors. So people transition from being on the staff doing something to being a supervisor. Excuse me for a second. Sorry about that. So the dilemma is this: there are supervisor roles in every one of the career pathways we've identified, but there's no supervisor credentialing program in the region at all. The closest one that I could find was at CCBC, and that's substantially outside the region. And the credentials that are offered are local credentials. In other words, you get a CCBC certificate of completion. You don't get a nationally recognized credential. And nationally recognized credentials are important for the workforce system because it opens up opportunities for job seekers to get scholarships if it results in a nationally recognized credential. So our goal was to develop a program to sort of fill this gap. And in talking with Swin and others, other partners, we felt like that, yeah, this was something that could be really valuable, but it might be more advantageous to pilot it with incumbent workers rather than job seekers, because incumbent workers are a lot easier to handle as it pertains to the scholarships. The process for getting a job seeker into the program is a lot more drawn out. So that's how we arrived at sort of the framework for this current pilot. So I like to make my presentations interactive. So I have some questions for you. These are for those of you who have witnessed people transitioning from staffer to supervisor. What are some of the issues you've seen in staffers making the transition to supervisor? Don't be shy, speak up.
No, it's hard for them not to realize that they're not their friends anymore. They try to still be their friends.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult.
Which makes conflict resolution hard.
The conflict resolution part?
Yeah, discipline when needed is very difficult at times.
Mm-hmm. So could you elaborate a little bit on that issue about as the relationship changes? They were formerly friends and now one is working for the other. What's the dynamic there?
Well, you have someone who's in a group, you know, as we know, there's silos in the workplace. And so staff feels like they're staff and everybody else is in a different level. So once you take somebody from that group and they go forward up into mid-management or supervisor, they have a hard time breaking out of that group.
Okay. So the relationship evolves.
I think it's very difficult at times to separate themselves for not purposely showing partiality, but when you socialize with someone and then you become their supervisor, there's that air of maybe preferentiality that seems to be prevalent at times, even though it may not be the case, but it seems to be that sometimes.
So if you can't make that transition, it has a negative impact on team dynamics.
Yes.
Well, how about this? Have you ever promoted or seen somebody who is sort of the best widget maker in the organization promoted to be the widget supervisor? By that, I mean the best performer at doing their job as a staffer, then rewarded for that by being made the widget, made the supervisor of the people who are doing that work.
Yeah, that happens a lot. And unfortunately, the best widget maker doesn't make the best widget supervisor.
Yeah, that is one of the things that we constantly see. And what motivates you to be a high-performing staffer might not be the same thing that motivates you to be a high-performing supervisor. I'll give you an example. There are a lot of reasons that people go into supervision. One of them is that they've reached their ceiling as a staffer. And the only way for them to make more money is to move into management. Well, if making more money is your primary motive for moving into management, then a lot of times you'll make the decision to do so without having a lot of the other really essential and helpful motivating factors, like the drive to be in charge or the drive to develop others. There's all sorts of different things that go along with being a supervisor other than making more money.
Sandy, I recall a book I read decades ago, The Peter Principle.
Mm-hmm.
A person is promoted to their level of incompetence.
I've seen that in action many times. I've seen some kind of dark reasons. I've seen some supervisors go into the position so that they can have quote unquote control over their team in a very detrimental manner because they want to get back at people who they don't have great relationships with. So there's some very negative reasons that people go into management. So what skills do your new supervisors typically lack? What have you seen?
I think across the board, I think that sometimes supervisors or staff are promoted to supervisors because somebody leaves and there's an opening, but they're never given any training. They just expect them to move into that position without the training. So there's really no skill development. Sometimes you'll have someone who really wants to be a supervisor and they go out on their own and they get a lot of training that they do on their own, which puts them in a good position, but that's rare.
You said that you came in, that you got to where you are today, having gone through the Army. And one of the things that I noticed about the Army, one of the things that I learned about the Army, because we had a lot of soldiers at APG when I worked there, a lot of trainees, is that the armed services are the best trained occupation in the country. You cannot do your job until you have received a certain number of weeks of training. We're all accustomed with basic training, of course, but then soldiers had to go through applied training. At the Aberdeen Proving Ground, we had the Ordnance School where they would come in for 15 or 21 weeks of training before they moved into their jobs for vehicle maintenance or whatnot. And with the Army civilians, on the other hand, the civilians that supported the soldiers, that training ethic wasn't there. And we see that a lot in the private sector, to where taking the time to train the individual to move into a new position just isn't there. They expect you to move in and sort of learn on the job. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to fix here. So I want to start talking about my 3 strategies here, and I'm going to go into depth on some of the things that I do as an organizational development consultant, regardless of whether you're moving into a supervisory role or just being a high-performing professional. This applies to everyone, this first strategy. And I call this strategy, it's not what you know, it's who you are. And the goal of this strategy is for the individual who's moving into the supervisory position to understand that they need to achieve a very high level of self-awareness if they're going to be successful. There's some research that backs up the whole idea of the importance of self-awareness. I'm going to refer you here to the Genius study, which was conducted back over 20 years ago. It seeks to find out, why do some people consistently achieve much greater success with less effort, while others who work just as hard, are just as intelligent, and even work in the same work environment achieve much less. So they assessed nearly 200,000 employees from 23 countries. They administered personality assessments to them, and they correlated them with how successful they were at work. Were they high performing? Were they low performing? What have you? And the findings were extremely interesting, because there was no statistically significant correlation between performance and what we would consider talents, things like intelligence, skills, etc. So you had very intelligent people who would do very, very well in a role, and you would have very intelligent people who did not perform at a high level. But the 2 factors they determined had an overwhelming impact on career success was self-awareness and authenticity. Self-awareness is the ability to understand what your strengths are and your blind spots. And authenticity is being able to be in a position where you can use those strengths 100% of the time and manage the blind spots. So what this means is anyone can achieve the genius level of performance as long as you know yourself and you be true to yourself. So this is the reason that I use personality assessments in all of my organizational development efforts. The one that I use most commonly, although I'm certified at about 6 different assessments, I use something called the DISC Plus. It combines the DISC behavioral assessment with the values index, which looks at what motivates people, what drives people, what their values are. And these assessments reveal your strengths and blind spots. It really gives strong insight as to what you're passionate about and what motivates you. And through this, it can clarify how you naturally approach being a supervisor. So you're going to want to be in your preference, no matter what role you take. So as you move from being a staffer to being a supervisor, you're probably going to try to be the same type of professional that you previously were. So I want to give you a couple of examples here. And this, in this example, we've got 2 people who are moving into the role of supervisor from being a staffer. And I don't want to go into what you're seeing here. These are results from DISC assessments, which is one of the personality assessments that I use. And it gives you an idea of how these people behave along 4 dimensions. So what I can tell you about these individuals is this person here, who I call the creative, is very driven for immediate results, achieving immediate results, yet they also have a strong desire for perfection. So they want it now and they want it to be perfect. And they tend to be viewed as aggressive. They can think and act very quickly. They can explore all options before making a decision quickly. They have great planning ability and they strive for perfection. They may lack attention to interpersonal relationships. They weigh pros and cons, but can appear cool and aloof and blunt to other individuals. Whereas the counselor approaches things very differently. They embrace others with the warmth, empathy, and understanding. They tend to be very calm, sincere, and loyal. They are good long-term relationship builders and very good natural listeners. They tend to put people first by providing recognition to others. They attribute less importance to task accomplishment. And they're apt to be over-tolerant with others because of the importance of those relationships. And when in a position of authority and responsibility, they like to be appreciated for their contribution. So each one of these people is moving into the role of supervisor. And let's just take these things that we see, these characteristics, as the strengths they bring in. What are some of the challenges that the creative might face, given the things that aren't listed on here as strengths? Otherwise, in other words, some of the blind spots that they may have. Anyone have any insights? Does everybody think the creative is the ideal supervisor?
No, not at all.
Okay, so what is it that what are some of their blind spots that might cause problems for them as they change into the role? Let's look at one of these bullets. May lack attention to interpersonal relationships. If you lack attention to interpersonal relationships, how can that be a detriment in you making the transition?
Be difficult to develop relationships.
And why are relationships important for a supervisor?
Because you can't motivate and inspire your coworkers without them.
Okay,
I mean, you can, but not necessarily in the right way. You won't be able to maintain it.
what about, that's a really good point. What about the top bullet? Desires immediate results, yet has an equally strong desire for perfection. How could that be a detriment?
That's a lot to expect of a person.
We used to say that in my project management days, you can get things good, you can get things fast, and you can get things cheap. But you can only, you have to choose two of them. It is a lot to ask for somebody to say, I want immediate results and they need to be perfect the first time.
Yeah.
How about in the way that this person presents themselves? They can appear cool, aloof, or blunt, and they can appear aggressive. How could that be a detriment?
It doesn't seem like it would foster trust.
Mm-mm.
Yeah,
A lack of empathy, and a good supervisor has to be empathetic.
so a lot of the things that you guys have pointed out about the creative, you can find in the counselor, can't you? Embraces others with their warmth, empathy, and understanding, long-term relationship builder. What are some of the things that the counselor, what are some of the counselor's blind spots that might get in the way of being effective?
Have a hard time getting a task completed or done right because I see them as the creative person is more of a task driven, where the counselor is more people driven, and you have to find your way in the middle somehow, because either one of them to the far right or left are not good.
Yeah, if they're not, if especially as a first line supervisor, the people who you're managing are mostly involved in task accomplishment in one form or another. So if you attribute less importance to task accomplishment naturally, then that can really get in the way when it comes to actually getting the work done. What about apt to being overly tolerant with others?
I was just gonna mention that one, Sandy, that
Yeah.
could be some dangerous waters. That could be, you could become supervisor, could become an easy target. You have to really be careful about that one.
Right. So what I wanted to show you here is that each has a distinct set of strengths and blind spots that they bring to the role. And each will tend to approach the role in ways that align with their strengths. But after learning the needs of the role, each will need to develop a strategy to work through their strengths to be effective and manage their blind spots. So each one of these people needs to have a different strategy for being effective as a supervisor that both leverages their strengths and manages their blind spots. Blind spots are a thing that exists no matter what. They will always be blind spots, and you can learn skills in order to bridge that gap. It really helps, though, if you work through your strengths. I want to give you an example here. And I use this all the time, and it really amazes people. I had administered this assessment to one of my networking groups, and there was a real estate agent who took it, and it showed that her primary driver was economic, and most people in sales have a very high economic drive. And she is also driven by the need to sort of be in charge and manage things. But she was not driven by a sense of altruism. Again, this is very common. People who have high economic drive often have a moderate or low altruistic drive. And this confused her because she happens to be on a lot of volunteer positions. She does a lot of volunteer work. And she said, I do all this volunteer work, but I don't have a high altruistic drive. I don't understand why. And I said, well, okay, so you do the volunteer work, but what is your motive for doing the volunteer work? Can anybody guess what her motive was?
It look good on a resume?
Make connections to sell stuff to people.
Bingo.
I know that one.
She did it to make connections, to meet people, and to generate leads. So her motive for doing something altruistic was through her economic drive. This person, the creative, will have to figure out how to work through their strengths in order to achieve some of the things that the counselor does naturally. And the counselor will need to learn to work through his or her strengths to achieve some of the things that the creative does naturally. So that was our first strategy. It's not what you know, it's who you are. The second strategy is I call the many hats of the supervisor. And this is sort of taking what we now understand about self-awareness, strengths, and blind spots, and giving this a real world meaning because of what the role of the supervisor is. One of the questions I ask people in leadership roles is, do you know how well developed your staff is? So I'm going to give you a few ways of figuring out, in your minds, how well developed is your staff, and through this to hopefully give you some insights. And this can apply differently for different types of organizations, but this is one way of assessing the individuals who are part of your staff. This is a sort of an assessment of how responsible they are, how knowledgeable they are, and how independent they can be. That reflects sort of the level of trust that you have. So at the very low end here on the left, this is a person who can perform the task as long as they're given very explicit instructions. So you give them an outline, you give them a procedure, you give them the outcomes that you want, and you're checking back with them on a regular basis to make sure that they're doing the job right. The next level here, you now say to the person, well, now that you know how that this is done, I want you to outline options for performing the task to me, and then I'll select the best way to do it. Okay, once we've mastered that, we now go to, okay, I want you to outline the options for performing the task and make a recommendation. So now you're seeing that this person is becoming more adept, higher level of independence, and is more confident to make recommendations. So now we go to this fourth level. I want you to just perform the task and report back. You pick the option yourself. You don't have to recommend the option to me. You just go do it and you report back on the results. And then finally, you just go perform the task and you don't need to report back on the results. So once you've achieved this level of high independence, you've got a very high level of trust in the person. You can rely on them and you can delegate more things to them. In the business that you're in, you might never reach this fifth level with any of your employees. It might be asking a lot just to get them to this level. Maybe you will always have them report back. But this is a way of sort of assessing how well developed each individual is. And because of this, supervisors need to wear many hats. Because as they move through that process, they're going to need the supervisor to perform a different role for them. So this is a way of looking at the different hats that the supervisor needs to wear. Because down on the left end of that chart, what they need is somebody who provides explicit instructions, is very task-oriented, and will take the time to do regular follow-up. So they need a director, somebody to direct, okay? You might even think that some people on this end will require some level of micromanagement. But we don't want to keep being a micromanager because our goal is to get them to this second level, to where we now listen to them, develop our relationship better, offer advice, and engage them through their strengths. So our role now goes from being a director to being more of a coach. So now we're coaching them so that they can achieve a higher level of independence. Once they've achieved a high enough level of independence, we now want to focus more focus on outcomes and less on giving instructions, give them more independence. We want to support them. We want to say, you tell me what you need from me in order for you to be successful. And I'm going to give you more independence as a result. And then finally, the last role here is when the person is fully empowered and competent, they require minimal supervision, you can be a delegator. So you move from being a director, a coach, a supporter, and a delegator. This concept is called situational leadership. It involves looking at the individual's needs, meeting them where they are, and then developing them forward. And I want to look at employee development along three axes here: aptitude, attitude, and accountability. So on the aptitude axis, they start performing tasks as instructed. They move to making the recommendations. They then move to independently getting the work done and getting it approved. Then finally, independently does the work without approval. For their attitude development, they start out being eager to learn, but highly dependent on authority. Then reality sets in. They become more critical because they start seeing new ways to do things. They might feel hemmed in, and they seek more independence. But eventually they can accept the reality of the situation. This is why we have to do things a certain way, but you've made some good ideas, so let's evolve, let's refine, let's start improving the way we do things. There's a lot more clarity and better results. And then finally, they get to become autonomous, supportive, and have great teamwork. And then accountability, this is something that gets overlooked a lot. Accountability is extremely important at all levels in an organization. At first, the person on the far left end of the spectrum, they might be unaware of the issue. They tend to blame others. They can move from that to understanding the issue more, but then using personal excuses. I can't do this. I don't have the authority to do this. I don't understand enough about this. And then again, acknowledging and embracing reality, learning more. They get to the point where finally they can become more of a problem solver. They find solutions, they make things happen. So again, we move through higher independence, higher trust, better attitude, and higher degree of accountability. Does this make sense to you? Is there anything here that just seems jarringly out of place? I know this is a lot to take in.
No, it makes sense.
Okay. So let's go back to our two people, the creative and the counselor. This creative person, with what you know about them, what role do you think they will naturally gravitate towards? The director, the coach, the supporter, or the delegator?
Director,
Okay, why do you think that?
because they're providing explicit instructions, they're task oriented, they want to achieve perfection in their own work and those who work under them.
Mm-hmm. Do you all agree? I agree as well. I believe that the creative would more frequently gravitate down towards that director role. What challenges would they have in putting on a different hat there, the hat of the coach, the supporter, the delegator?
That's a develop relationship.
As we move up through this
Informational.
process, the ability to develop and deepen relationships becomes more and more important.
Mhm.
I've seen directors or people who gravitate towards the director role who do things, in a fairly impersonal fashion, that once they learn this about themselves, try to figure out, okay, how can I be more, how can I manage my relationships better? So this person says, okay, now every Friday, I go around and tell everybody how good of a job they're doing. And make sure that they know that I appreciate them. The way that they do this is that they have their assistant put a reminder in their calendar, in their schedule, so that at 2 o'clock every Friday, I go around and do this. It doesn't come naturally to them, but they work through their strength of being organized in order to achieve what appears to the receiver to be more of an interpersonal contact. And it really works for them. So the creative is going to have more problems as they go forward here, especially, when it comes to the role of delegator. Will the creative ever be able to totally relinquish control to a competent individual? Have any of you worked for people who are more like micromanagers? And any of you who are more naturally independent? This fits me to a T. I was very naturally independent when I worked at APG, and I worked for a micromanager once. And every now and then I thought, APG is a big place with a lot of woods. They'll never find the body. But I ended up, just saying, I can't work for this person anymore, and I left.
Mhm.
That's just the way he managed. He was a micromanager who was very controlling and was unable to prioritize things. So we just but it has. But there are other people who like that. There are other people who like having somebody who gave them explicit instructions. What about the counselor here? Where do you think the counselor would gravitate towards?
Supporter.
Hmm.
Supporter, yeah.
Yeah. How many of you agree with supporter? How many of you think coach?
I think it's a little bit of both.
I tend to agree. I tend to feel like that there's a role of, that there are things about the role of the coach and things about the role of supporter that lend to the counselor's strengths really well, and that they would gravitate towards this. But then again, we talked about this before. What happens when they need to be the director? If they have people who are at that end of the development scale, who actually need to have somebody who's a strong director. And will they be able to see that? Will they be able to say to that person, yes, this person, you need a director and I need to fulfill that role. So I have to step outside of my preference of not being task-oriented to become a lot more task-oriented. So again, is this making sense to you? Each supervisor will gravitate towards the role that feels natural to them and best exploits their strengths. Each supervisor has to develop their own strategy for wearing different hats and stepping outside their preference. And each supervisor needs to know where their team members stand in the development process so they can know what hat they need to wear at what time. So that was the second strategy. Now we're going to go to the third strategy, which harkens back to the first strategy in a way. I call this, it is now not what they know, it's who they are. And by they, I mean the people on your team, the people you are supervising. We want to now move from our own self-awareness to achieving team awareness. Through the same process, we would take the assessments and give them to everyone on the team. We would share the results so that the supervisor can see sort of the entire spectrum of strengths and blind spots of the team. Learn sort of what the team character is, what the team culture is from that. It gives strong insight on what each team member is passionate about and what motivates them. It clarifies how they naturally approach doing their jobs, how their blind spots may be getting in the way, and it reveals a lot about team dynamics and lays out a roadmap for team performance. So let's now take our creative and our counselor, and we're going to say the creative is the supervisor, and they are managing a counselor. So the creative is the supervisor, the counselor is the staffer. And again, I'm going to put up a reminder of what the strengths of each one of these people are. And I've highlighted a couple things. And we've sort of alluded to this before. If the creative is looking to supervise the counselor, what are some of the things that could get in the way of their relationship? What are some of the things that the counselor is going to be looking for from the staffer, from the creative, that the creative might not naturally provide? What are some of the things the creative is looking from the counselor that the counselor might not naturally provide? How do you, let me back up and ask this. How do you think these two would get along naturally?
Not good at all. They have conflicting agendas.
Yeah. Do you think the counselor would like working for the creative?
No.
No,
Do you think the creative would like managing the counselor?
Nope.
Hmm. There are things that they expect from one another that they're not going to get. There are some things that, however, they can learn to appreciate in one another. One of the principles that I use as somebody who coaches folks in team performance is that your strengths make you a good coach in those areas. And once you learn what the blind spots of your team are, you can now say, I can coach you in those areas. So the creative can help the counselor with once they've identified that they attribute less importance to task accomplishment. I can help you with that. I can help you, and then the counselor can say, well, I can help you with my ability to be a long-term relationship builder in your natural avoidance of interpersonal relationships. So the supervisor going through this process understands the strengths and blind spots of the staffer, what they bring to the role and what they need to be successful. And with this insight, the supervisor can develop better ways to communicate with, motivate, and develop the staffer. And in a sense, they will help develop each other. So this is sort of the ultimate goal here, is that you learn from one another. And it might be harder for the creative to embrace this, especially if they approach this role as sort of a my way or the highway type of philosophy. But this is a way to overcome the differences and build bridges across the gaps. And what you're seeing here is a report that I can generate once I've given the DISC Plus to a team. What you're seeing is a way of depicting all of the results for the DISC scores for a team on one grid. So at the top of this grid, you see an individual scored in a way that makes them more extroverted. At the bottom, more introverted. At the right, more people-oriented, and at the left, more task-oriented. So this team, boom, it's sort of concentrated down at the introverted, people-oriented quadrant. There's a whole lot of people down here. There are a few that are on the outskirts, but most of them are concentrated around here. This person up here, who's extroverted, more extroverted, is the supervisor. This is an actual client that I had. And all these people are very, very different from him. So this ends up being a slower paced, collegial, structured, introverted team and a driving, less personal, less structured, extroverted supervisor. And this can lead to huge issues in communication gaps, teamwork, overall organizational pace, overall expectations between the two. The supervisor is going to want to go at a very fast pace. The team is going to want to move at a more moderate, reasoned, predictable pace. The supervisor is more comfortable with dynamic situations. The rest are more comfortable with more structured situations. So we've got a lot of things to overcome here. But the supervisor needs to develop strategies to bridge and manage these gaps. Because once you know this, you've got information that you can use to help develop strategies. And you also need to know where each team member stands in the development process. Do they need a director? Do they need a coach, a supporter, or a delegator? So when you look at it at this scale, you sort of see just how complicated the supervisor's task can be. You know, there might be some people on this team that need a director. Some might need a coach. Some might need a supporter. You might never get to the point where everybody could be delegated stuff. But you definitely need to know where they are so that you can move them along the process. So I've given you these 3 strategies here. Do you have any questions or comments about them? We're right about where I thought we would be. Do you want, is there anything about it that you don't understand, that you need clarification on? Does it make sense to you? I see a nodding head. Does anyone disagree with anything that they've seen? I'd be happy to talk through it.
No.
Okay. So let me talk about the training program overview. When I discovered that we needed a supervisor credentialing program for the region, I looked around to see what was out there that was nationally recognized, and I found this from the American Management Association. This textbook here is called First Line Supervision. It's written by Charles M. Cadwell. They provide the correct credentialing as well. The way this works is a student will get the textbook and take a pretest. The pretest gets sent to American Management Association. Then we go through the training. At the end, they take a post-test, which is the same as the pretest. We send it in, then American Management Association grades it, and then provides the credential based on the results. The goal is to achieve a noticeable, the goal is to achieve a noticeable increase in skills. Sorry, how odd. I just got a low battery notification, but my computer's plugged in. So the pilot course that we've developed is 8 weeks long. That's another goal for the workforce system here, is that credentialing be achieved in 8 weeks or less. This is going to be a combination of one-on-one and then in-person group training, weekly Zoom meetings for office hours, and then additional video training to support the curriculum. And again, I said I wanted to do 1 pilot for each county. Here's an overview of what we go over. First, as we say, achieving self-awareness. I'll begin with one-on-one training for everyone. The goal will be to administer the DISC plus to everybody, to instruct them on it, to go over the results with them, and to sort of lay out, this is how you naturally approach things. Here are some blind spots that might get in the way. And here are the things that you bring to the role, and here are the things that we're going to need to develop in you. Then becoming a supervisor, where we identify the requirements for making the transition, going over the 6 key competencies for effective first-line supervision. There's a whole segment on communication skills, focusing on improving listening, because the ability to listen is key for a supervisor, learning how to develop people, learning how to manage people, giving both positive and corrective feedback, identify strategies for working with difficult employees and managing conflict, learn how to build a team, learn how to get the work done, implement processes, and identifying performance motivation factors, supervising in a changing environment, introducing legal issues, learning techniques of supervising a diverse workforce and how to manage change, and then doing things to assure your success. What do you need to do moving forward here? The scholarships, I've mentioned scholarships once or twice here. The local scholarships that are available for workforce development come through the Susquehanna Workforce Network. They provide, in a program called Susquehanna Works, 50% reimbursement for businesses in the Susquehanna region. They have a number of different programs that fund Susquehanna Works. right now, they're pretty well off as far as training dollars go. The Maryland Workforce Exchange, again, they're 50% cost of training reimbursement for for-profit and nonprofit private sector businesses headquartered in Maryland. The program's called Maryland Business Works. And then this last one, I'm not really sure about because it's on their website, but I wasn't able to talk to anybody about it. The Cecil County Office of Economic Development for businesses in Cecil County called the Workforce Training Partnership Program, 50% again, reimbursement for the cost of training. Alan, are you aware of any other? There is one in Harford County as well, but they do not fund training scholarships for this type of training because they focus on technical skills as opposed to leadership related skills. And so they took a look at this program and said, no, we wouldn't fund this.
Yeah, those are the three program pools that I'm aware of, Sandy. I'm not too sure about Cecil County Office of Economic Development about.
Yeah, that one, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I wasn't sure they would do that. I can send you a contact if you wanted to reach out to him and he could comment on it more effectively than I certainly could.
Okay.
But I know we'll certainly consider it. There's currently not a representative in the area for Maryland DOL as far as Maryland Workforce Exchange is concerned. But, you know, it's we could get a contact. That person is left, but I could get you someone or get the employer someone.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
So here's something that I'm sure everybody's interested in knowing. What's the total training investment required given all this? Well, I designed this program to be starting out at a $2,500 program. This is a bargain at $2,500 for 8 weeks of training, probably around 40 hours of individual and group instruction per student. That's a bargain as far as training goes. I wanted to discount it because we're doing the pilot. I discounted it down to $1,800. And then with the 50% reimbursement, your total investment required to be $900. So I wanted to make this dirt cheap because it's worthwhile and I want this pilot to be successful. So lay it on me. Final opportunity for questions. Lay it on me.
Sandy, are we able to get the PowerPoint or something that lists the information that you just shared, like what will be covered each week, and then also the scholarship information?
Sure. What I can do is I will send you, first of all, I will send you a link. There's already a link in the chat box to register for the training that does not require a payment at this time. But I can give everyone links to the websites for the scholarships. Definitely for the SWIN and for the Maryland Workforce Exchange. And then I can give you as much or as little of this presentation as you want. If you just want the latter part that lays out the training program itself, the scholarships and everything, I can give you that. I can give you the whole thing if you want.
Yeah, Sandy, I was
like
going
I
to
said,
suggest that you send everyone at least a link to our website for the eligibility requirements for the Susquehanna Works. It's not automatically a slam dunk. There are some eligibility requirements that have to be met, you know, and certainly I can work with each individual employer, talk with them as I've done in the past, but just wanted to let everyone know that it's not a slam dunk. You know, we will consider it and hopefully we can get it approved. But, you know, just so everyone's aware, there's eligibility requirements.
And when does the next session start?